Development series on the U of M campus, and so we welcome faculty and staff as well as students to his presentation today. He's a very interesting gentleman, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy a great deal. He spoke this morning with us at the Montana Gerontology Society meeting downtown, so this is my opportunity to hear him again. He's president of Health Futures Incorporated and associate professor of public health sciences at the University of Virginia, and has previously been a lecturer in the Graduate School of Business at the University of Chicago. Also lectured at the Harvard Business School, the Wharton School of Finance, Johns Hopkins, Washington University, and the University of California at Berkeley. He earned his doctorate in sociology from the University of Chicago in 1973 with a study of complex organizations, sociology of the profession, politics of the developing nations. Graduated from Reed College in 1970. Prior to that, majoring in psych and classics, and had a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship for graduate study in 1971. He's a prolific author, has written for the Harvard Business Review, and a source for many articles on medical technology and health services for publications such as the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Business Week, Time, and other publications. Member of the editorial board of Health Affairs. He wanted me to be sure and tell you that he is a native of Portland, Oregon, so he's actually a Westerner, just like probably quite a few of us, but presently lives in Charlottesville, Virginia, father of 2 sons, grown sons, and a 20-year-old daughter. He's been to Missoula before, been through Montana a number of times, skiing on motorcycles and all sorts of active things, and I will let you fill him in on, I'll let him fill you in on all the details. So with that.
All right. Thank you, Gail, very much. Good afternoon to all of you. I want to commend you on your fortitude in giving up an absolutely glorious spring afternoon. It's just achingly beautiful out there. I live in a town very much like this, only our mountains are like 3,000-foot high mountains. They're sort of hills or bumps for Westerners. But Charlottesville, I don't know how many of you visited, is really very similar to Missoula, except it's got all that Confederate stuff going on. And the ghost of Thomas Jefferson, who still walks the campus. So it's really nice to be here. I'm going to hopefully leave enough time for questions. In fact, if you have questions or comments, or just don't throw anything heavy while I'm talking, please raise your hands and get involved. The big question that's on a lot of people's minds, particularly young people, is our generation, the baby boom generation, going to drown our country in debt? And the $72 trillion is the estimate of the net present value of all of the promises that we've made to older Americans for the next 75 years, in the Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the unfunded part of the promises that we've made to older Americans, including you. And there's a whole cottage industry of doomsayers out there. Here's a sample of some of the doomsaying that basically suggests that our generation is going to drag us all down and drown us as a society. I won't read this, it's too grim. You can all read it, you wouldn't have gotten in here, right? We had fires, floods, plagues of locusts, 4 horsemen riding out of the wilderness, that sort of thing. I found this irritating, because I read a lot of this, and it didn't square with what I knew my colleagues and age peers were doing and thinking about doing. And began working on, trying to develop a case and evidence to suggest that maybe it's not going to go the way we think it's going to go. This blue area under the curve is the baby boom generation. The reason why I put that up here is because there's a lot of people here who were born after 1980, or I suspect around 1980. Look at the size of the millennial generation. There are already almost 110 million millennials. If you start counting millennials in 1980, you dwarf, in other words, the baby boom. There are 30 million more millennials than there are baby boomers. That issue will come back to us towards the end of this talk, because it's actually very important. Now, boomers are not blameless. We have done some harm to our society, and I think we need to own it. Disco, for example. Guilty as charged. Polyester leisure suits. That dreadful, treacly 1970s pop music. They let these people into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame this year. What were they thinking? Elvis impersonators, the mullet, haircut, the Ford Torino. I mean, there actually are a fair number of things that I, as a baby boomer, I'm personally ashamed of, and I want to apologize to you for all of them. But I don't think we're going to drown our society in debt. And let's talk about why. Now, of course, our Social Security system is over 75 years old. It was enacted in 1935 in the depths of a horrible depression. The average male life expectancy at the time was 57 years age. So how convenient. Select age 65 is the age of entitlement to getting Social Security benefits. How clever. 50% of seniors in 1935 were on relief. It was like state and local relief. It was literally pennies. It wasn't enough to keep them going. Medicare turned 45 in 2005, so even Medicare is sort of middle-aged and showing its years. And one size fits all. These programs were built without regard for the diversity of circumstances of people at age 65. It assumed that they were all the same and had the same needs. This was a Social Security recipient in the 1930s. Clem was his name. He was actually the younger brother of a Social Security. This is an elderly person today. I suspect that these folks are about the same age as Clem was, but you can sort of see the difference. That's actually the chief health officer of her family explaining to her husband that he needs to go get his hemoglobin A1Cs checked. And he's going, what? Like husbands of that age typically do. Now, if you look at the public opinion data, and I've looked at all of it, the thing that really stands out about boomers is their preternatural optimism. And this is data that came from the AARP in 2004, 4 years before the crash. There's a certain poignancy to these numbers. 69% of boomers believe that what happens to them in the future depends largely on them. And 68% believe that when they really want something, they can go get it. Again, 2004. More. 69%, well, wait a minute. 72% of boomers in 2004 believed their lives would be better in 5 years, versus 42% of older Americans. 5 years later, of course, was 2009, the depths of the recession from which we've yet to emerge. Only 5% of boomers thought their lives would be worse in 5 years. Well, those were the people who were actually right. The dark side of all this optimism is that 48% of boomers said they'd rather be spontaneous than plan their futures in detail, which means that, of course, I can start saving money any old time, or I can start being healthier any old time. These aren't healthy necessarily, but they do represent an engine for creation of new things. The belief that the future is going to be better, for better or worse. I think that distinguishes Americans from a lot of other societies. It really irritates our European colleagues who find our optimism grating and unrealistic. Now, why are the people I call the catastropharians wrong? The Alan Greenspans and Peter Petersons. Well, a bunch of reasons. For one thing, the wealth and education level of my generation far exceeded that of any previous generation. Our parents' generation, as late as 1950, only 8% of them had graduated from college. 28% of our generation graduated from college. Now, that doesn't mean we're always going to do the smart thing, but it does mean that you can have an intelligent conversation with us about all the stuff we did wrong. And so there's at least a basis for some self-criticism. We'll show you the wealth numbers in a minute. Health status and health care for older Americans has dramatically improved over the last 25 years, and for a significant fraction of our generation that will continue to be the case. We'll show you those numbers in a minute. The modal boomer is only 54 years old today and thinks they're 40. I guess you can think whatever you want. If you could think you were 15, that wouldn't be all that helpful, but it does betoken an attitude. And most importantly, most boomers planned on working well past traditional retirement age before the crash. It's somewhere between 8 and 15% of people in my generation expected to stop working at age 65. This is actually the single most important thing I'm going to tell you, because what that means is that the assumption that at age 65 we all quit working and sell our homes and move to Florida and play shuffleboard and listen to old Jimmy Buffett records isn't the way it's going to go. most of my generation plans on continuing to work long into their 70s and 80s and plan to do so before our retirement funds melted down into a pile of goo and we realized we were probably going to have to work much longer than age 65. But that's very important because working longer has really important implications for people's health. It also means they're going to be paying taxes instead of consuming them and paying for a lot of the benefits they're going to be receiving as a matter of law when they turn 65. And actually, I'm not eligible for Medicare or for Social Security until I'm 66 because they began pushing the thing up a month a year in 1982. Later boomers, it's, believe it or not, 67. Now, we out-earned our parents and grandparents at every year along the way to getting to where we are. You can see the early boomers and late boomers. And if we just left it at that, it would have been great. But we far outspent them. Out-earned them, but far outspent them, which meant that our generation, and actually the Gen X people that followed us, basically leveraged themselves out the window. That's the reason why we had that horrible recession, is because we reached a point of having $14 trillion worth of household debt between mortgages and credit card debt, and got to a point where we just couldn't service the debt anymore. Not a good thing. So here's what happened to, versus the silent generation, this is the people that were our parents. You can see that average liabilities per household almost more than double, almost triple the ratio of liabilities to net worth, half again. So really crummy balance sheets for our generation. And of course, what happened in the crash, our society lost about $12 trillion in wealth in a year. Half of that was on the baby boomers. So us boomers lost about $6 trillion in the crash. A lot of that isn't actually coming back because it was sort of real estate wealth that was foam. It was a product of speculation more than it was actual real value. And the debt only went down by $500 billion for the country as a whole. So the balance sheet's actually really badly deteriorated as a result of the crash. And we're going to be working off that debt and having to learn how to save, all of us, for quite a long time to get back to even. Now, the good news. I mentioned earlier that the health status of older Americans has steadily improved for the last 25 years. The latest data that we have on this is 2004-2005 data, but you can see this is the rate of decline in the disability status of older Americans starting in 1982. You can see the rate of decline is accelerating. And what that means in practice is that a larger and larger percentage of older Americans, not just the young old, the people who are 65 to 70, but the old, the people over 85, are actually able to take care of themselves. That is, that they can perform all of the activities of daily living that it requires for them to be independent, eating, bathing, dressing, driving, those kinds of things. This is the data for age 85, and this is really pretty remarkable. As late as 1984, only a third of the over age 85 population could do all of the activities of daily living required to be independent and to not depend on you all or us themselves. By 2004-05, over half of the over 85 population could basically do all of those things. And you can see what happened and their parallel trends to the percentage of the over 85 population that's been institutionalized has fallen by half. Despite all of the forecasts that we'd have soaring nursing home populations, nursing home census is falling in the United States, despite an aging population. And the reason is that more and more older Americans are able to take care of themselves rather than relying on other people to be paid to do it. I believe this is going to continue for at least 2/3 of our generation. And it will be 21 years before the first baby boomer turns 85. So, you kind of forecast those numbers out, and what you have are a large number of people that are not only able to take care of themselves, but many of them will be working and paying taxes and paying for some of the services that their less fortunate age peers and colleagues will need, offloading some of that responsibility from the younger people in this room. Now, there are some dark things here. This was data from the University of Pennsylvania in 2006. About half of baby boomers reported their health as excellent, which is actually a little lower than the percentage of their parents' generation that reported that health status. 22% of boomer men and 33% of boomer women in the survey reported difficulty getting out of a chair. That's a little scary. And a slightly higher percentage of both boomer men and boomer women, notice the women had worse health status than the men did, reported having a chronic health condition versus their parents. That might have been the result of all those drug advertisements that said, do you have, right, because we're all hypersensitive to the fact that we might have a syndrome of some kind. My sister has several syndromes. Now, there may be circumstantial evidence, the getting out of the chair thing, to suggest that our nation's obesity epidemic might have played a role in this. This is just a marvelous cover of The Economist about 7 years ago, and it took me years of looking at this to realize that it was satire. Okay? I mean, I'm a little dense about some things, but that one really, because it took from our chimpanzee friend here to Homo erectus was about 2 million years, and then from Homo erectus to Homo slurpianus, the big gulp, was about 20 years. So the idea that this was genetic doesn't really hold a lot of water, because genetic changes usually take a lot longer to manifest themselves. This really was diet and exercise, fast food, drinking a lot of Slurpees and not exercising. And really, you compare us to the Brits, and I mean, I don't know how many of you have been to Britain recently, but it's hardly a paragon of healthy living. They've got this thing now, I really love this, where there's like a contest to find a way to prevent beer mugs from shattering, because tens of thousands of Britons are injured every year in beer fights where the thing shatters and they end up getting glass in their faces. This is not exactly a healthy place, but look how much healthier the baby boomer era Brits are than we are. I mean, that's really scary. Triple the incidence of diabetes, almost, more than triple, almost double the rate of incidence of cancer. So, while I think it is safe to say that on the average, baby boomers are likely to continue that trend of improving health status and therefore reducing the amount of health care and support that they will need, there's a subset of our generation that's already in deep trouble that could be very expensive to take care of if we can't figure out how to address these problems, and really more as a public health problem than anything else. My colleague Ken Dykewald had a great article in the Harvard Business Review in 2004 that asked the poignant question, is it time to retire retirement? And he went and looked at the employment structure of our workforce and found huge gaps, particularly our federal government. Something like 90% of the federal executive workforce, that is the senior grades, the GS-15 to GS-18 types, that basically, the permanent bureaucracy folks who basically run our federal agencies, are eligible to retire next year. School systems, cities, county governments, many industrial firms have comparable exposure because we just haven't trained enough young people, or enough young people haven't gone into those disciplines. Health systems face comparable shortfalls in frontline caregivers and physicians in primary care disciplines. The average age of a surgical nurse in the United States today is 50 years old, and of an RN, 49. You look at elementary and secondary education, there are basically a ton of baby boomers that are going to be eligible to retire in the next 5 or 10 years. Now, right now, of course, we've got school systems laying people off. But when we resume and kind of look around us, we'll realize that there are a huge number of young kids that are going to be coming into school because of this echo baby boom. 4.3 million children were born in the United States in 2008, which was as many as during the peak of our baby boom. So there are actually a lot of public services that if people actually do go and retire, we aren't going to have anywhere near enough experienced workers to perform the tasks that those boomers are now performing. And as we mentioned, 70 to 80% of boomers would like to continue working after age 65, not all of them full-time. But the point is if we can figure out a way to organize work in an intelligent way, perhaps we can figure out how to create partial retirement options for those folks and transitional job roles, mentoring roles, emeritus types of roles, so that people can continue contributing their knowledge and energy to these places while you millennials get up there and get to the point where you can take over their jobs. The jam up in our economy right now is at the entry level. Is that there's a whole bunch of people that aren't being pulled into employment because our economy isn't creating any new jobs. But when the economy resumes growing, we're going to have shortages of workers all over the place. And to the extent that boomers actually do retire in significant numbers, large sectors of our society that aren't going to be able to function because of the gap. And this is what happened in the decade that we're just leaving. You can see the huge increase in the people in the workforce age 55 to 64. Look at the shrinkage in the mid-career population, a 10% shrinkage in the number of people. That was that trough called Gen X. We experienced an absolute decline in the number of workers in that age category, and it's really hurting a lot of companies. This is a great slide that shows the age structure of the registered nurse population in the United States. Doesn't that look exactly like a wave? Well, that's what it is. And if we don't do something to make more intelligent use of our nursing person power, if nurses we can't figure out a way that nurses spend more than maybe 40% of their time taking care of patients, and that's all they do today. By the time we get to 2020, we'll have an 800,000 person shortage of RNs in the country. And that 2020 coincides with a period of time that I believe our generation will be experiencing significant increases in the demand for health care, because that front edge of the baby boom will be moving on into its 70s by that point. Now, not all boomers are the same, and that's a very important point for social programs that assume that everybody a certain age has the same needs. There are a subset of baby boomers, maybe a quarter, maybe a little less, who are what I call set for life. These folks have a net worth on the average of about $1.2 million, smaller obviously after the crash, but still in a position that they can pretty much do what they want to do, work or not. They can cease working, and they've got enough assets to be able to sustain their lifestyles, pretty much indefinitely. There is a much larger population. This was between 1/3 and 1/2 before the crash. My sense is that it's close to 60% of the generation now that I would call might be okay. And I say might be okay both in the sense that they're under reserved for retirement and that they've got health issues that if they don't take care of them could be very expensive and limiting as they get on into their 50s, 60s, and 70s. And while they may have been unconcerned about the future before 2008, they are plenty concerned about the future now because they've seen the value of their retirement plans devastated by the crash. And then finally, a population of people that could have been between 1/4 and 1/3 of the generation before the crash that I think could be higher, 35 to 40% of the generation now, that I would characterize as anxious and hurting. Perhaps some of your parents fall into this category. Multiple afflictions, no or few assets, likely to be unemployable by the time they get to their mid-60s because of disabilities of various kinds, whether they want to work or not, and scared, and for really good reason. And my major argument for not pushing up the age of eligibility for Social Security, like some people would like to see it at 70 or 72, is that for that 25 or 30 million people, they're going to have trouble making it to 65 or even to 62, and really are going to need access not only to health care but to income support long before many of their more fortunate age peers and colleagues. So the problem that I have with our present programs to deal with folks in their 60s, 70s, and 80s is that we make no distinctions among their circumstances in the main. And we really need to begin thinking about how to get particularly those anxious and hurting folks some help now so they don't become a huge burden on their families and on society later. So, for the set for lives, my argument is, why should young people working at McDonald's subsidize Bill Gates' drug coverage? That just doesn't make sense to me for some reason. And remember that because we've spent all the Medicare and Social Security money, every single penny of the benefits that we pay out to wealthy older Americans comes out of the pockets of young people who have no homes, who have in many cases no health insurance and no assets. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So my argument is, why not give the more fortunate sort of set for life boomers the option of deferring receiving those benefits until their 70s or 80s even. Right now today, some of you might not know this, with Social Security you can wait until 70 and a half to claim the benefit. And your reward when you do it is that you can get a bigger check. I think that's a great idea, and I think you ought to be able to defer indefinitely. that it shouldn't cut off at 70 or 72 or whatever. I think people ought to be able to defer on into their late 70s or early 80s. And the same with Medicare. There are a lot of older Americans, people in their 60s, that are insurable. They're healthy, they're working. Why do we assume that because they reach the age of 65 that they are automatically entitled to health benefits paid for by a bunch of younger people? That doesn't make sense either. So I'm a big fan of the idea of not only letting people put off getting those benefits if they do not need them, but also reducing the public subsidies. I mean, I don't see any reason on earth why I should collect 5 to 8 times as much as I put into Medicare, paid for by all of you. That just doesn't make sense to me. So I actually think that the public benefits that we do provide, we ought to pay more for ourselves. And in fact, in the health reform bill, that's something that actually happens, because we are going to be paying more, unfortunately, through not the world's greatest mechanism, through a capital gains tax increase. I wouldn't have done it that way. But I think the basic principle that the set for lives, who are probably going to live longer than the rest of the people in their generation, ought to be paying more for the benefits they receive. I think it's the right thing to do. For the might-be-okays, I think it's really important for them to begin saving money now. That idea of leveraging yourself out the window, borrowing off your home equity to buy bass boats or big screen TVs. I mean, I think that we've just, hopefully we've kind of gotten past that. And what used to happen as people got into their 40s or 50s is their saving rate would go way up, to maybe 30% of income. Well, it didn't with boomers. It has to now. Because we're otherwise, if boomers don't begin saving, particularly folks in that might-be-okay category, there isn't going to be an asset base sufficient for them to support themselves, and they're going to have to depend on you, right? The younger people in this room. I also think that employers ought to be willing to invest in training and development. If people want to learn computer skills, if they want to learn a new trade, if they want to learn a new part of a business that they've worked in, it makes sense for those mature workers to get access to that training, so they can move laterally in their fields and continue working. Because continuing to work, as we've said earlier, means that they're going to continue paying taxes. And I also think attacking those obesity and chronic conditions early, making sure that people get access to those meds, that's one of the things that's going to happen because of health reform. There were 11 million uninsured baby boomers. 11 million. And a lot of those folks have chronic conditions that are avoidable or preventable. If you don't have health insurance, you can't afford your insulin, you can't afford your beta blockers to control high blood pressure, you're going to end up being a lot sicker by the time you go on Medicare and cost our society a ton of money, and it's really avoidable. And then finally, for the anxious and hurtings, frankly, I was a big advocate of letting people into Medicare early, because there's a subset of people that are probably not insurable. Even under the health reform, it's going to cost a ton of money to cover them, even if you don't discriminate against people because of pre-existing conditions. So my argument was, let people into Medicare early and change the Medicare program, change how it pays providers to encourage them to manage the chronic illness in that population more effectively. I also think that the health maintenance organizations like Kaiser are really well set up to deal with people with multiple chronic conditions, to make sure that they get the multidisciplinary health care that they need to really begin controlling those things. Again, attacking obesity and chronic conditions earlier. And this is a little bit deep in the weeds for people that aren't policy wonks, but you remember during welfare reform, what was the secret to getting people off welfare? It was a negative income tax called the Earned Income Tax Credit that basically multiplied the amount of money that people got from low-wage jobs so that people could live without getting on welfare. Well, we've got a whole bunch of people in their 50s that are not only have kids in school, but have parents that are ill that they need to take care of. I believe that very same negative income tax ought to be applied to older folks that have those obligations, so that they are able to generate enough cash flow that they're able to avoid becoming dependent on Medicaid or perhaps on some form of welfare to get them through the next 15 or 20 years. So I think, again, there's diversity in this large 76 million person group. There ought to be a diversity in societal response. We ought to be putting our resources where they're going to make the most difference and help the people that are hurting really get to the point where they maybe can be more self-supporting. Now, it is remarkable how big a deal working 5 years longer is for the society. If boomers worked 5 years longer, they would generate enough new tax dollars, both in Social Security and in income taxes, if you channeled all of it into the Social Security program to make up the deficit in Social Security. That's how big a deal it is. And there is a tremendous amount of leverage from earnings in later years that multiplies the asset base of individuals. Believe it or not, I can't tell you exactly how the calculation works. Gene Sterling is an actuary at the Urban Institute that's done the calculation. A 5-year longer work career adds up to a 56% increase in lifetime income for baby boomers. So a strong societal reason why we ought to encourage people to work longer. I also think getting our economy moving again is going to be really important. The Wall Street Journal made this point, again, before the crash. Paying benefits to 75 million of us baby boomers in 2030 will be a much lighter lift if we have a $25 trillion GDP and a net worth as a society of $100 trillion. It's about 80, maybe 75 trillion now. Then a slower growth in the interim years leaves us, say, a third less wealthy. And I think that's a very important point. I mean, it's hard to believe, but population forecasts from the U.S. Census Bureau suggest that by the year 2050, we will have 430 million people in the United States. In other words, more than 100 million people will be added to the United States in the next 40 years. We'll cross 400 million in 2043. And there's actually a great book that just came out by Joel Kotkin, who's a social scientist and demographer, called The Next 100 Million, that talks about where those folks are going to go, what they're going to do for a living. But, you know, the idea that we have a zero-sum society, that there's a lump of resources, does not take into account the effect that we have a dynamic society and economy that is continuing to grow. That growth is vitally important to paying the ultimate cost of taking care of us when we really do begin falling apart in earnest in the 2030 to 2050 period. So we really need to get the economy moving again. We need to find the millennials that are looking to enter our labor force, good jobs. They will spur a revival in our economy, and the additional growth that will be created, economic growth that will be created, will be vitally important for ultimately taking care of us when we really are in a fair amount of trouble, wealthy or not. I mean, look at this again. You look at the baby boomers, and you can realize it wasn't a coincidence that we had this huge economic boom in the United States from 1980 to the year 2000. That boom was created by baby boomers themselves, generating a tremendous demand for services, for products, for housing, you name it. Think about the amount of demand that the millennials are going to generate when we finally are able to get you going economically. It's going to dwarf the economic consequences of the growth that we created when we moved into our heavy earning years. So there's really, this is a remarkable chart. This shows the percentage change in the so-called working age population in 20 years and then the next 30 compared to other countries. Look at us. Double-digit increases in the working age population. Highly educated working population. Look at us compared to Germany, to Italy, to Japan, and even to China. Thanks to the one-child policy, China falls off a cliff in terms of its population growth and that working age population after the year 2020 and goes into active shrinkage. So they better be growing now, because they're going to need the wealth to take care of this enormous population of people that have risen up into middle-class status during the last 20 years of their economic boom. So I guess it is kind of hard to argue, since we've had such a hard economic time the last 2 years, for an optimistic view of what's going to happen to our generation. But I really believe that if we make the right choices as a society and as a political system, we can figure out a way for our generation to continue to contribute to the wealth and strength and knowledge of our economy and create a foundation of well-being for a very much larger and hopefully prosperous country. My book, which came out in 2008, is called The Long Baby Boom. It's available for free on my website, which is www.healthfutures.net. Sitting there as a PDF file. Got it. Thank you all very much for having me here. time for questions, right? Just don't throw anything.
How does the trend in inequality in income affect this? In other words, why don't we just tax the rich and we solve this problem?
Well, that's exactly what we're going to do here in the next 2 to 3 years to get out of the hole we're in. The problem is, what is the signal that it sends to those set-for-life boomers that are sitting on $35 trillion in assets? If you tell me to put the money in municipal bonds and just sit there and collect coupons, baby, that's exactly what I'm going to do. What you want that $30 trillion to be is invested. And if you punish people for investing by particularly raising the capital gains rate, we won't get the economic growth that we're going to need. So I think the issues of tax policy are very important here. We could have a punitive tax system, and we could have the kind of growth that we've seen in Europe, which isn't going to get it done. We need to think hard about what kind of tax policy is going to encourage people to invest that tens of trillions of dollars so that it creates new jobs and new opportunities for young people. And I'm not a refugee from the Reagan administration. I'm a Democrat.
My question actually follows on that, because I'm confused about that point. You said capital gains tax increase is a bad idea, but then you said we should give the set-for-life people to pay for their benefits.
Right.
Isn't that what the capital gains increase is about?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to do it, and I think the capital gains tax increase was the wrong way to do it. I would have taxed consumption. I mean, the only significant tax increase, other than the capital gains tax in the health reform bill, was a 10% tax on tanning salons. Give me a break. I would have taxed junk food. I would have taxed trans fats. I would have considered a value-added tax with an offsetting reduction in the income tax, or a complete elimination of taxes on unearned income, dividends and interest, to encourage people to save. We need to think about what the incentives are to put those tens of trillions of dollars back to work and to create jobs, new enterprises. That's where the growth, at least in my judgment anyway, is going to come from. Right here.
Well, okay, I guess kind of going off what you were saying about, you know, like how they say eat healthier, but if you go to the Whole Foods store, it's twice as much as if you go to Walmart, and vice versa. And then you also say, you know, like, we need more healthcare workers, but the cost of school is so expensive, and everything like that's going up. So it's like the ideals are there, but I don't understand. We're not going towards those ideals. I'm not very fluently speaking well right now, but you know.
It's all good. I get what you're saying. I will say that, you know, if you shop the specialty items at Whole Foods, you're going to get looted. What do they call it? Whole paycheck? We have one in our town. You shop the 365 brands, they've created a brand structure that they deliberately peg to what you can buy at Safeway. So if you shop smart at Walmart, or at Whole Foods, you don't have to spend your entire paycheck. I think that's part of the issue. There are so many temptations. There's so much free food out there. You know, you take it and then you buy, you know, $20 a pound Jarlsberg cheese. That isn't going to get you where you need to go. And, you know, Walmart, I mean, people throw darts at Walmart all the time. Walmart is dramatically expanding the offering of organic and healthier food products and using their crushing merchandising advantage to bring the costs down. Why are they doing it? Well, they're not doing it for, you know, because they're idealistic people. They're doing it because it's good business. So I think there is a demand on the part of a lot of Americans for healthier food and for healthier lifestyles. We have to figure out a way to support it and encourage it. Right here.
I just want to comment on what the young lady said about the healthcare workers. School is very expensive, and the average person does not want to spend 4 years going to school, putting probably $75,000 to $100,000 away so that they can make $40,000 and basically wipe drool, urine, and feces. That's not what people want to do nowadays. And I am a middle-aged RN, so, and I've been working for 40 years. And that's the other part of my comment, is that if I were to defer and continue working until I am 70, will there be a tax benefit? I mean, that's something, I've been working for 40 years. I've been paying into the system for 40 years. So I need an incentive for me not to retire at 65.
Right. I agree. And I've argued that I think the longer that you defer, the more you ought to be able to collect. I mean, part of the reason why you get more is because you're not taking it down, and then, and then how long you're going to live. So you're sort of gambling that you'll live long enough to get the benefits back. I think that we have tremendous inequities in how we pay our healthcare workers. It makes no sense to me to pay an RN $40,000 a year and to pay an interventional radiologist $700,000. That doesn't make sense to me. We really didn't touch it in the health reform bill, because if you'd had powerful provider interests trying to kill the bill, we wouldn't have gotten it. But I think clearly we need to be thinking about, I mean, think about a medical student. They go to medical school, they come out with $250,000 in debt, and they're sitting there going, well, what do? Do I practice primary care, and I'm still paying off my loan when I'm 62 years of age? Or do I practice dermatology, and pay it off in 6 years? It's just not a fair fight. So if we don't have the political courage to change how we pay healthcare workers, to truly reward them for the value that they create, well, we'll all have great skin, okay? And we'll be sitting in the hospital over the weekend waiting for someone to come in to take care of us, because there will be nobody to respond to call coverage for the crucial things that need to happen. So we've got a lot of work to do to begin right-sizing compensation in that industry.
Do you think that there's going to be a growth in graduate schools? Because I noticed that there's, like you said, there's a shortage in medical providers. I've noticed with physical therapy schools, it is ridiculously hard to get into. So how do they expect to have those care providers when you can't even get into school? Because the programs are so small.
Well, there's a lot of places that are cutting back on enrollment because they're having budget problems. And there's a lot of people that want to get into nursing school that can't because there aren't enough nursing faculty to teach them. So there's a lot of things happening right now that are extremely unfortunate consequences of this recession that are shrinking the capacity to train a lot of the workers that we are going to need. So it's very troublesome. We are seeing an expansion in medical schools, but if the medical schools continue training a lot of people that are going to want to go and make $700 grand a year taking care of our skin, it isn't going to solve the problem that we were just talking about. So I think there are multiple problems here that have to be solved in order for it to come out right. Right here.
I've got two questions. One's clarification. You talked about postponing retirement by 5 years would see us accumulate 56% more in lifetime assets, is what I thought.
We save the additional money.
So-
We save the additional money that we're...
So are you talking about 5 years from a point, or just 5 years period? Are you talking about instead of retiring at 65, retire at 70?
Right.
Or is it instead of retiring at 55, retire at 60?
Well, I think the average age that people in my parents' generation stopped working was about 62. And what I'm talking about is 5 years from that.
Okay.
So it'd be 62 to 67.
Okay.
I think there are going to be a whole bunch of people that basically work until they drop. I can't imagine not working. I just can't imagine not working. And work, to me, is writing books and doing things like this. This is a tremendous amount of fun. I'd do it if you didn't pay me.
My second question is anybody put any cost on those people who are put in a position of perhaps staying at home to take care of a parent or a spouse, a partner, who to keep them out of that nursing home? Because if you have assets, you don't qualify for Medicaid,
Right.
which means you can drain all your assets, or you can figure out a different way to try to do it. And if you try to do it at home, you may or may not be able to continue working.
We've got a whole set of unfinished business about how we pay for long-term care. I mean, the idea that we have this system now that encourages you to literally bankrupt yourself, to burn down all your assets in order to get... We need a system of long-term care insurance. There's actually an attempt at that in this health reform bill that a lot of people are criticizing. But we really don't have another way of financing it now. And 80% of the long-term care provided in the United States is provided exactly the way that you suggested, by unpaid family members who are sacrificing their lives and livelihoods to take care of their older relatives that they feel a moral responsibility to. And I'm not sure that's the right solution either. I think there is going to be technological help for this. I think there's going to be tremendous improvements in the ability to manage people at a distance. I think that people will be connected to those relatives instead of having always necessarily to be physically present. The Alzheimer's population, I think, is going to be a particular challenge because there are going to be, I don't know, 10, 15 million, 20 million Alzheimer's patients. So I'm not sure how you fix that. But we really do have to do something about, financing long-term care in a more intelligent way, because the way we're doing it now is crazy, not sustainable. Back of the room.
You wrote your book in 2008, is that correct?
Actually wrote it in 2006, and it came out in 2008.
Given the pushback, the political pushback on health care reform and the recent meltdown on Wall Street, if you're going to change anything about that book, if you were going to pick it up today and amend it, change it drastically in any way, what would you do? Or would you still hold the same tenets?
Honestly, I think this is a horrible thing to say because of all the suffering, but I think that the crash was a really well-timed wake-up call for my generation. Because I think a lot of people were waiting to begin doing the right things about their health and financial security, and they glimpsed this chasm. I mean, this thing just opened up and a lot of their assets disappeared into it. I think it scared a lot of people. I mean, it sure scared me. Perhaps into saying, wait a minute, maybe I need a plan here. So a lot of what I'm talking about in the book, I write for 20 years or 30 years out. And I actually said at the end of the book, it would be an absolute miracle if we had another 27 years of uninterrupted economic growth. That's just not realistic. And part of the problem of our generation was that we had not experienced a significant economic crisis. Charlottesville, Virginia, where I live, the last significant economic downturn was 27 years ago. 27 years, almost 30 years ago, 1981. There were large parts of the United States that had almost 30 years of uninterrupted prosperity, and I think people really, they kind of lost their compass during that period of time. We really need to get our act together. And sometimes it takes a crisis to get people thinking about what they actually need to do.
So how about for the small business owners? Because I know my family, we have a small business, and they're still taxing us like we're a large corporation. And they're all disappearing. There aren't very many people that are trying to own their own small business anymore.
I'm marrying a florist who is one of those people who basically works 70 hours a week trying to keep the thing going. I don't think our tax policy or our policymakers really think about small business when they make policy. Now, small businesses were exempted from a lot of the mandates and requirements under health reform. But is it going to be more affordable for my fiancée to get health insurance for the rest of her workers? I'm not sure it is. We really didn't do anything meaningful to cut the cost of health care as a result of this bill.
Besides writing books and articles and stuff, do you do anything directly to participate in the policy-making process?
I worked for the governor of Illinois right out of graduate school. I drafted legislation, I wrote speeches, I did investigations, I did long-range strategy and planning. And then for the next 8 years after that, I worked at the University of Chicago Medical Center, where I was responsible for planning and government affairs. So my first 10 years out of school were really spent in the policy world.
And currently?
What I really do now, I blog aggressively about all of this stuff. During health reform, I was on the healthcare blog, which is a lot of fun if any of you are ever interested in it. And also the journal Health Affairs, which is the leading health policy journal in the country. They put up a blog in 2007, and I was on there all the time. So I was actively contributing to critiquing a lot of what was going on, and I'm continuing to do it. I've also read the darn bill. If you run out of Ambien, all right, there is a resource here for you. Drafted by your own. It's 2,409 pages of just completely incomprehensible. So a lot of what I'm going to be doing in the next year or so is trying to explain to a $2.5 trillion industry how to deal with it. So I'm actively involved in policy issues. And I have a lot of friends in Washington. Senator Ron Wyden is a friend. I have governors that are age peers and colleagues that I talk to about this all the time. I didn't get involved in this thing here other than as a blogger.
Jeff, I'd be curious to hear your comments. I've traveled different places around the globe, and what I see in my travels that is quite surprising to me is how many people retire overseas with their Social Security benefits or whatever benefits they're entitled to and plan on living their golden years overseas where their money will go further, their health care. For instance, Mexico, I just returned from Mexico. I was so surprised to learn that you can get health insurance for $350 a year. Incredible.
Look at what you're buying, though.
But not bad, Jeff.
Well, it's highly variable.
Well, it certainly is, but if you pick the right time, do your homework, you can live comfortably.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
No doubt about it.
No doubt about it.
Costa Rica, Panama.
Yeah,
there's a
all
bunch
of that.
places.
And
New
Thailand,
Zealand.
Sumatra, Africa. There's places that you can go if you do your homework that you can live. I'd be curious to hear your comments on that. Do you see a lot of baby boomers who are taking that option, or was that even anything that you had noticed in your?
Tough to know. I think there are going to be a lot of people that do it. I was really tempted to emigrate to New Zealand in the 1990s. I absolutely loved what I saw over there. What a great place. It reminded me a lot of the Pacific Northwest, without Bill Gates. Yeah, I think a lot of our generation are, particularly the set for life folks, they can't go anywhere. I think the problem is that they're going to want to be near their grandkids, when they have them. So I think that is going to be a bit of an issue. I think people do want to stay close, and it's, maybe they have, maybe it's a Skype relationship, where you've got that great big screen and there's your grandkid. I don't know if that's going to work for me. I don't know.
So I was just looking at, a lot of the people in the room are either baby boomers or millenniums.
Right.
What would you tell us? I'm 26. What should I be doing right now for my retirement? And
boy, oh boy, get started now. And figure out a way to put the assets in a place where you don't even see them. Just put them in a place where they just grow. And actually, I think there's a really strong argument for putting them into growth stocks. And that is the craziest thing to say, given what's happened to our stock market. But you look at the NASDAQ companies, the core of our knowledge enterprise in the United States is in those companies. There is a tremendous store of value there. So don't wait until you're 38 or 40. Even $1,000 or $2,000 a year has huge out-year consequences if you just have a nice, stable, sensible investment strategy and leave it alone. The problem I had was that I was always fiddling with the money, and I would always get the timing wrong. It's one of those, you have to find a strategy that's just set it and forget it. And then you look at it in 10 years and it's grown by tenfold. Right here.
As a student of social work, I believe that everybody should have access to everything that they need. However, I've heard some people say in regards to health that like smokers or people who don't take good care of themselves, like in your slide of evolution, I've heard some people say that those people who don't take care of themselves should be punished.
Right.
What do you think about how do you provide them medical when they're actually using kind of more than their fair share?
Well, I don't know a whole lot of smokers that want to continue smoking, because they know it's bad for them. I think we ought to help people manage their addictions in a sensible way. I have trouble with the health police idea that you test someone's blood or test someone's urine and raise their insurance premiums. That's actually illegal under this new bill. There is a permitted I think it's like a 50% increase in premiums for smokers. That was the one health condition that was permitted to affect your health insurance rates under the new regulations. But I don't think that kind of punitive approach really fits very well with our society. This is a libertarian society. This is a society where we ought to bear the consequences of our actions. But we ought to provide people with support that if they really do want to live healthier, that it's easier for them than it is now. We have to figure out how to help people master the things that they want to get rid of in their lives, that if they do get rid of them would enable them to be healthier and cost the rest of us a lot less money. Right here.
About 10 years ago, I read a book that was written by two scientists that had worked for the tobacco industry. And they both got lung cancer, and you couldn't work for the tobacco industry unless you smoked. So they were fired because they got lung cancer. And so they wrote this expose. And they spent a year going around the country asking people why they smoked. And if they didn't, why didn't they believe the warning that was on the cigarette label? Every single person they asked, a year of asking, they got the same answer, and the same answer was that if it was really true that it caused cancer, that the United States wouldn't sell tobacco.
Oh, whoops.
They
Wow.
got the same answer from
fascinating.
every person for a
Well,
year of asking.
You know, all I can say about that is that only 15% of cigarette smokers get lung cancer. 15, that's it. So there is clearly a genetic trigger. If you knew you had the genetic lesion that predisposed you to smoke, you'd probably make a different decision about starting. And actually, it's interesting that the tobacco company is funding the research into finding the genetic mechanism for that precise reason.
Oh, yes.
You know, I mean, it isn't just cancer that you worry about. There's also heart disease, high blood pressure, and those things. But, what? Gum disease, yeah, gum cancer, and yeah, there's a bunch of bad things that happen to you when you smoke. But the cancer thing is the one that scares everybody. Lung cancer is a dreadful way to die. And only 15% of the smokers will get lung cancer.
I have a question leading more kind of to the demographic data. You showed all these countries, all the developed world except for the United States, pretty much the population is expected to shrink. Why is that different in the United States? I'm from Germany, so I have my ideas about that.
What do you think?
But one of the reasons...
Why are you here?
Exactly. That's
Why are you here?
There's a reason why I'm here, and there's a reason why I have children here, and I did not have children when I lived in Germany, although I was married to the same person.
Please tell us.
Yeah. Well, it's when I go to a restaurant in the United States, there is a menu there for my children. And if I go in Germany, the restaurant owner will look at me with the nasty views because I'm bringing disturbance in their establishment. So
That's the reason you're here?
No, that's not the reason why I'm here. That's the reason why I think raising or having children in the United States, or the United States, is much more accommodating to having children. Although in later years I have to pay significantly for that, because in Germany higher education is pretty much free and it's very expensive here. But I guess when you have children, you don't think of 20 years down the road.
Well, I can tell you, for generations, this has been a country that has recruited from the rest of the world the restless, high-energy, entrepreneurial people that really believe they have a greater chance to do what they want to do with their lives here than anywhere else. To the extent that that continues to be the case, we will continue to grow. And that's a product of political decisions that we're making today. You know, I mean, it is entirely possible that a large generation of the brilliant young scientists and engineers that are training here from India and China might decide to go home because they perceive that those are now the places where they can go and be freer to do what they want to do. So we really are in a kind of global competition. We're not competing against those economies, but we certainly are competing for talent. And if we continue to be a place where people can dream something and make it happen, we will continue growing. And it's up to us.
The data you showed about the decrease in the rates of disability from the National Long-Term Care, last year numbers showed that it was the first time that the trend was not continuing, that it was going,
leveled?
That it actually moved up the other direction. Is the first. If that isn't just a blip, what does that do to the rest of the? And with the obesity epidemic, I mean, maybe that isn't the cause, but it would certainly be a contributing factor. If that is not a blip, that just if we continue to the disability rates as those are defined,
Turn around.
What
We've really got some issues. And, you know, I can tell you, I have a close friend and colleague that was the strategy officer at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It was their #1 issue. Besides bioterrorism preparation, it was their #1 issue. What do we do about this? How do we change public behavior? How do we change the economics? How do we encourage people to be healthier? What do we do about the people that are already trapped metabolically in bodies that they don't want to be in? I can assure you, because I've looked at the research literature, we're not going to have a pill for it anytime soon. The research community really hasn't been able to figure this out. So, I mean, 5, 10 years, we're not going to have a medication-type solution to this problem. Now, I don't know a lot of people that have body mass indexes of 35 or 40 that want to be in those bodies. But boy, once you get there, it's really hard to get out. So, I mean, I think it's a huge, this is something we've really got to get on as a society.
But what happens to the rest of the trend analysis?
Well, it really hurts the trend. There's no doubt about it. And it isn't just the boomers that we have to worry about. I mean, as I mentioned, maybe I didn't mention this, but you know, it is entirely possible that the millennials will have a lower life expectancy than their parents did. And if that is the case, it will be the first generation in the history of this country that was the case. So, I mean, we really need to begin taking this at degrees of difficulty seriously now, if we're to have a meaningful chance of extending that trend, because it was an incredibly helpful trend. I hope it isn't over.
I'm an exercise science major, and I keep hearing in all of my classes that they are cutting more and more physical education programs in schools. And do you think that's going to hopefully reverse anytime soon? Because that would sure be helpful.
We have a terrible financial crisis in state and local government right now. And I mean, you've got schools that are just literally throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and that is a perfect example.
Yep.
I mean, but I even noticed it with my daughter. My daughter is 20. I mean, we used to dress for PE and shower afterwards. You know, I mean, that doesn't happen a lot anymore. So, I mean, I think it's gotten less rigorous. And, you know, people are trimming away athletic programs. They think it's you know, a frivolous expenditure of public dollars. I don't think it is at all. I think it's really important for our young people, particularly in the face of that threat that they actually will have a lower life expectancy, to lead active lives and to be encouraged by our schools and their parents to be active. So, no, I think it's a terrible false economy. Great questions. Back of the room.
What do you think about the idea of insurance covering alternative therapies as a strategy for heading off disabilities and, you know, long-term sickness?
You know, it's remarkable how many alternative therapies have prospered by our simply paying the price ourselves, and how much of a bargain they are compared to mainstream medicine. So I would actually be concerned that we begin getting the hospital disease if we begin broadly covering a lot of alternative therapies. I think they're very competitive now, and people really have to be concerned about what they're charging, because people are really paying 100% of the bill themselves. The fact that we've got a flourishing sector of alternative or complementary medicine without any insurance coverage should suggest to you that there's tremendous demand for this. And I think insurance in some ways is a problem. I really think that this whole focus of health reform on giving people insurance was, in a way, unfortunate, because we really weren't thinking about the things. How good a job have we done with the insured population in them being healthy, if we've got all the problems we've been talking about here a moment ago? There are so many perverse incentives in our health insurance system, and I am a scholar of those perverse incentives, that I'm really very concerned about the structure of those programs as they are, and just expanding them to more services, I'm not sure is a recipe for helping people be healthier.
Talking about that recipe and making people healthier. With the bill, I haven't read it because it is so long, and I don't need Ambien. Are there any preventative measures? Like, wouldn't the money be better spent in preventative measures, like increasing gym time and focusing on healthier choices for younger adults?
You know, there are portions of the bill that are going to be that allocate money to be spent on preventive medicine. I think a lot of the strategies that are going to be pursued aren't really going to produce a lot of change. I really support what you said, is that there are, you know, we focus so much of our energy on expanding insurance coverage and so little on public health, so little on understanding better the behavioral roots of illness and of, you know, the health habits that lead to problems later on. I think we've just, you know, this became a grand festival of providing incomes to people who are paid by insurance, more than thinking strategically about where we could put the money that would actually change behavior There were pieces of the bill that focused on public health, but I mean, believe me, they were afterthoughts compared to this whole issue of subsidizing the extension of conventional health insurance coverage.
Well, it's really not surprising since the Secretary of Max Baucus, who wrote most of the bill, was a former CEO for, I think, WellPoint, or one of the insurance companies. So
What? Max Baucus was the CEO of WellPoint?
No, his secretary that he hired, that he works under him, she was a former CEO, one of the top people at WellPoint, one of the insurance companies.
I don't know about that.
They really wrote the bill for the insurance industry.
Well, if they wrote the bill for the insurance industry, they pretty much comprehensively destroyed it. So it's not clear to me that you would want to own stocks in any of these companies, given the tender mercies of your Senator Baucus. They basically took the industry over. They basically have created a federal structure to regulate its profits, to regulate its executive comp, to minutely define what is insurable, to minutely define what the rules are for covering people. My friends that follow this industry on Wall Street are convinced that it will devastate the industry's earnings. So if this was some dark plot to try and promote the health insurer's interest, it failed. I've been talking and analyzing this bill from that standpoint quite aggressively, and I don't agree with the thrust of your comment. This was not an act of kindness to the health insurance industry. Other comments or questions? Well, thank you all for coming, and have a beautiful sunny afternoon.